Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you, Ken?
I'm well, thank you very much for asking. Rory, how does this day find you?
I've got a frog in my throat. So
Not good for a podcast, is it, with a frog in the boat?
It's not good for a podcast now, but so we will push on. We'll just be fine, Ken.
We're going through it. This is episode 149. You've joined us on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We've got 3 topics we're going to be looking at today. The first one is preparing for next level interviews. If you're a student, you're on a formal course, chances are to progress, you're going to need to interview to get to the next level. We're going to be delving into that. Then we move on to our second topic, which is our check-in with our good friends at CPCAB, a topic that is so important at the moment, and it's reflecting on what support you may need as you kind of leaving the classroom, leaving the peers, leaving maybe the support of that personal development group and the feedback that you got.
Yes, I mean, at the time of recording, in a very few weeks, people will be coming to Journey's End, and they will be moving on from their classes. Some will be progressing, and others will be will just go back into their world again and take their skills maybe into another arena. And it's thinking about Journey's End and thinking about how you're going to use that real valuable support system that was your peers, and where you're going to map your support as you move out of class.
Looking forward to that one. And we end episode 149 with Practice Matters, where we speak about qualified practitioners, what you might come across, tools that you might use, self-care. And today, something really interesting, core assessment from the man himself, John Mellor-Clark. You had to speak with John, Rory, and it's really the discussion is about measuring the effectiveness, I guess, of therapy.
It is, and it's not often you get to meet someone who's made an incredible contribution to the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And John Mellor-Clark is one of those people. He's one of the architects of the core assessment tool. And I caught up with him, and we had an interview regarding core assessment, its use, and we dispelled a few myths about it as well.
Don't know if you can hear this, Rory, but I'm rubbing my hands together in anticipation for that one. But we're going to kick off with our first topic, preparing for next level interviews. And I know this is primarily aimed, I guess, at students who might be going in to interview to go on to the next level of the course. But I guess in some ways it reflects interviews in general. As a qualified practitioner, you might be going into a new agency for an interview, so there's going to be something in this for everybody. But let's start off by looking at the student journey, Rory. I am a student, I'm on a course, coming to the end, I come to graduation, I want to carry on, I want to go on to that next level, but I have to sit down in front of someone, and that brings up a lot of anxiety, a lot of nerves. People are speaking about this in our Facebook, we're getting messages about this. What must we consider here?
Yes, Ken, and you mentioned the Facebook page, and if you're not a member of our Facebook page, then why aren't you a member of our Facebook page? If you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find our Facebook page. It's a closed group. Knock on the door, we'll let you in with a cheery smile, and you can join the many thousands of students, qualified practitioners, and supervisors, and a smattering of tutors, all getting involved in a rich discussion about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this topic has come up, unsurprisingly, given the time of year we're recording this. And yes, interviews. And I think a lot of people, I can still remember my interview for my diploma, and I was absolutely terrified. And I'd been a manager for a Fortune 500 company, and I was really, really scared and angst-ridden. And I thought, I'll never get on this course. I'll never get on it. And I think this is something that is amplified a lot by people who are progressing. So we're going to share just a few little tutor tips, and I've prepared a handout, five tips for preparing for your next level interview, which you can go to our mother page, counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 149, and you can download that. and that will arrive in your inbox. But it is very nerve-wracking. We've interviewed a few students through the years, haven't we, Ken?
We have indeed. And, you speak about being able to look back, Rory, and see your own journey and see what that felt like for yourself. I can look back on my journey as well and look at my progression and my progression interviews. And the same was true. I had clammy hands. I was nervous. My heart was beating. And across the table was a man that looked scary at the time, and his name was Rory Lees-Oakes, because you were my tutor and you gave that very interview. And I remember being really nervous, but I also remember walking away from that thinking, wow, it wasn't really quite as bad as I thought it would be. And all I did at that interview was kind of just be myself. I remember you asking me one theory question, Rory, that I actually got wrong in the interview, and you very kindly helped me with it. I felt a little bit embarrassed, but you could, I guess, see that I was trying, and I knew the stuff. And I guess the message here is, when you are interviewing, the tutors are aware that you're going to be a little bit nervous, and they're not there to try and trick you and catch you out. All they care about is that they have a good cohort, a good group on the course, that are going to attend the lessons, that are going to work well together, and that are there because they really want to be there, I guess, Rory?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a few things here. Is that we need to take people on. I say we, it's almost like I'm still teaching, but we need to take people on who, want and have a passion for the work. And and usually the courses are 2 years, and that's a long haul. It's a real long haul. That's 2 years of putting your life on hold. I would say to people at the interview, this will enter your daily life on a daily basis and penetrate your dreams, in the evening, because it is a big bulk of work, and it's a massive step up. If you're doing a certificate, maybe at level 3 here in the UK, to step up to diploma is a real big step. It's a huge step. So we have to make sure that people, are in a position to be able to complete 2 years. Have they got any life plans? Are they thinking of moving house and moving to another part of the country? Are they thinking of changing their job to a more demanding job? You have to be realistic. And we have to think about the other members of the group, because what we can't have is half the cohort leaving because they've decided to do something else. It really spoils it for the rest of the cohort and makes it difficult to teach. So we have to be sure that people are committed. We have to be sure that people are in an emotionally stable place to be able to engage with the work. And, some people on level 3, they realize that they've got some difficulties that they've not resolved. They may struggle with it. That usually comes apparent if you're teaching that cohort. And you may have to say to someone, are you sure that you really wouldn't want to take a little time out, have your own therapy, settle yourself down in a way, and kind of look after yourself, and then come back and see us. And then also we need to make sure that people can work at the academic level that what is basically a foundation degree asks. And although they're vocational qualifications, we need to be sure that people have an understanding of the theory. It's only right and proper for people who are practicing to be able to understand the theory. We don't want polymathic knowledge, but to be able to understand the theory they're practicing and to be able to write it down. Unfortunately, it is a taught, you're in a teaching situation. And sadly, some people may struggle with that. And it's never easy to have to say to someone, I think you might struggle academically with this, because ultimately it's not up to you. You may think, as a tutor, I've seen lots of people who would make really good counsellors. Unfortunately, academically, they'd struggle terribly. And I have to pass them. I have to evidence them to an awarding body and also to my educational board. And we can put things in place for people like us who are dyslexic or may struggle. We can put everything in place. But even if that's in place and some people still struggle, then that could be difficult news. But apart from that, we're just wanting people to with a good heart to come in and go and help people, and that's the bottom line, really. So it shouldn't be as scary as people say, but I guess we do formalise it so that people really think about, if they want to do the course. I think the formal aspects of it really kind of focuses people's minds, Ken.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think when looking maybe at a counselling course, when maybe looking at that final step, that 2 years before going into practice or client facing, it can look rosy at the other end of that when you stand at the beginning looking forward and thinking, I'll have my certificate and I'll be able to see clients. But the road that leads there, as you've kind of outlined already, is wow. It is windy, it is bumpy, it is difficult. And you only have to pop into our Facebook group to see the stories of other people's journeys when they're struggling, when they're weighed down by assignments, when they're trying to balance their family life, their professional working life, still doing a job, and their supervision and placement. It really, really, really is demanding. And I guess it's the tutor needs to hold that gate, check that it would be in best service. In the same way, I guess, as when we are going to counsel a client, we might do an assessment and make sure that we're the best fit for them and that they're going to get what they hoped for out of the counselling on offer. It's the same thing. It kind of parallels that process. It's a long, arduous road, and robustness is needed. You mentioned, Rory, the academia, and I think the academic side of it, of course, it's important because there are assignments, and those assignments need to go through to be able to move on. And you may think, and often people will come in questioning their own academic ability because they maybe haven't studied for many years, maybe struggle to write to criteria, maybe have had assignments referred on a lower level like a level 3 and are nervous about that. And it's not so much about that. It's about asking for support where you need it. So at the interview, if you struggle with dyslexia, as I do, as Rory does, be open and say, I really struggle with dyslexia. Don't hide it. Be open about that. It's a plus in a way, bringing that out. And it will only be in support of yourself. It's that commitment at that level, I guess. And as you said, Rory, making sure you can be there. What are your future plans? Are you planning on starting a family in the next 2 years? Not a good idea to go on a counselling course. It's if you're going through a tough time in your own life, if you're facing a divorce, if you've got critical illness in the family, maybe not a good time to go on a counselling course. When you've got a level 4 group that are together for 2 years, and somebody leaves that group, it vibrates through the whole group. You really feel it. It's
it's true, and I think that just to clarify a couple of things here, I think that if someone has emotional or mental health difficulties, it doesn't debar you from joining a counselling course, but it's useful to tell the tutor at the interview. And I've graduated lots of people who've had I call them labelled mental health issues, and they've gone on to be really good counsellors. And yes, some of them still struggle with emotional things, but the main thing is they could keep themselves together. They're in a place where they could work with clients, they could engage with the work, and if necessary, they could come to me and say, "Look, I'm really feeling really, really bad," and we could work that out in terms of the assignments. A little bit more difficult when you're in client work. And also, of course, I've graduated people who've had families, and have come along and said, "Hey, announced the group, hey, I'm going to have a baby," and we all have a good clap, and it's all exciting stuff. But I think that if someone declares that, you obviously you don't want to say to someone, "Well, you can't come because you're pregnant," but you can say to somebody, "Well, look, you have a think about this because having a new child in the world is quite a big commitment, and have a think about it." But I think we've graduated people who've just had children or had children, so that doesn't debar you from joining a course at all. But you have to think about it. And I was asked questions like, you're a commercial manager, Rory, and what are your plans? You currently haven't got a job. Are you going to go back to being a commercial manager? And if so, can you attend a daytime course? Which I think is a very valid thing, So I think it's about being realistic as well. I think a lot of people may really want to do the course and may just be have slight rose-tinted glasses to the reality of their situation. So yeah, that's where we're at. But certainly, I think every person, as we do in counselling, should be taken on the merits. And I know that when I was recruiting, we had 2 or 3 people in the team, and we did it by a show of hands. So it wasn't just one person's decision. We'd sit around and we'd look at the application, and then we'd have a show of hands. And if anybody disagreed, then we'd talk it through. It wasn't just an arbitrary yes or no.
100%. And so that kind of gives you some viewpoints from a tutor's perspective, from your own perspective of going in. Be yourself, be honest, be open, and yourself will always be good enough. We talk in counselling about congruence of what is happening inside shows outside. That is a strength. So be free to be yourself. And that goes for any kind of an interview situation. When you're trying to be what you perceive they are looking for the course, that's where it falls apart, or where you try to be what you perceive they're looking for this job, almost playing a part at the interview. That can kind of not work out so well. You are just perfect just the way you are. And I guess the end result of this may be that you don't get on the course. It does not mean it's the end of the road. Maybe a question comes up where you kind of self-evaluate and go, you know what, maybe I'm not ready for this right now. It doesn't mean it's the end of the road. If you finish the level 3, you don't have to immediately go on to the level 4. There can be a break there. Your level 3 will still carry with you. If you don't get on one course at one college, university, learning institution, there are others that you can go to interview to as well.
Yeah, and I think the interview is useful actually to get a sense of the non-directiveness of therapy. And I've had people I've interviewed, and halfway through they said, actually, I'd prefer to be a social worker. And it's like, that's great. You can take your skills, and you can see our colleagues in the health and social care pathway, and do the foundation qualification and go on to do a degree in social work. And I've had a lot of that. And some people struggle with it. Some people come because they want to be a helper in one way. And then they think, well, counselling's not for me, really. I want to do something that's more directive, that may seem to be more structured. In which case, good luck. Good luck to you.
Indeed.
Go and do that. Go and find your own destiny.
Yeah. One final thought from myself on this is, if going into any interview, so whether that be for a placement, whether it be for a job in an agency, whether it be for a place on a course, take some time before that interview to have a think of 1 or 2 questions that you can ask at the interview process. Generally, at any interview process, they'll say, do you have any questions? And it's always good to have something that you can ask, but have a real think about it, of things that you really want to know. It's a 2-way street. Going on a course, getting a placement, getting a job. It's going to be a relationship that will go on. It's not just about you being right to the tutor. It's also about the tutor and the course being right for you. So go in and feel free to ask the questions you have about the course, the learning. You could ask something, for example, saying, you know what, I struggle with dyslexia. What kind of support is available at this learning institution? And that's kind of my final thoughts.
Yeah, and I think final thought is, excuse me, is to as Ken said, be yourself, and don't present as if you were talking to a colleague. I think a lot of people think it's like a formal job interview, and it's amazing to see the difference in people you've worked with for a whole year in level 3. And they come in as if they're coming for an interview to be a bank manager, and you have to say to them, "Hey, just take it easy," So it is very, very different to maybe the business and commercial world. But I think that every tutor in the heart wants to make sure that the person that they take on succeeds, and we wouldn't want to set anybody up to fail. And sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. But just be yourself. You can't be no one else.
For all of those of you who might be going for your interview at this time, all the best with that. We're kind of moving away from the interview process, which comes, I guess, at the real time that this is being made, close to graduation for many, maybe looking at progression, going on to a higher level. But graduation also means, Rory, kind of losing the support you have. You might be losing your tutor, working away from the peers that you shared time with.
You all have that one big hug, and everybody says they'll keep in touch forever. And then you go your separate ways. Where do you put your support systems? What do you need? Certainly, as I think people can leave courses feeling a little bit raw, and they may need some support. So thinking about where your support systems are and how you can manage those.
Let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we're here with Heather, and we've got a really interesting question. What do you do at the end of your course when you kind of lose your support network, when you all go your separate ways? Maybe pertinent for people who are doing a level 4 course, but yeah, what's your experience of that, Heather?
Well, I think in my experience, students can sometimes be not very well prepared for how they're going to feel when their course finishes, and they're not coming in every Tuesday afternoon or whatever anymore. I think students tend to really, really look forward to the end of their course and think how wonderful this is going to be, but don't realise until it actually happens how maybe isolated they're going to feel when the actual class contact stops.
Yes. So you're going in every week, you're seeing all your peers, you're spending on your tutors, and all of a sudden you leave, you get your certificate, and you're on your own.
Yeah, on your own. And you might have been together with that group, certainly for 2 years, for the level 4. You might have been with them through skills and studies. So you might have been with them for 4 years, and suddenly not to be seeing them, these people that you've shared your heart and soul with probably, is quite a wrench. So it's worth students and tutors thinking about how they're going to be with that when the course is finished.
Absolutely. And what kind of dangers are there in working in isolation? Someone leaves and they think, well, I'll set myself up in private practice, or they're not in contact with anybody. What are the dangers there?
Well, they could become very unsafe because they haven't got anyone else perhaps even to bounce ideas off. Of course, they've still got their supervision, whatever they're doing, whether they're still working in an agency or whether they do start private practice. They still have their own supervision to go to, and that's a great support. But that person doesn't necessarily know too much about their own personal history. So one of the things that students sometimes do is to keep their group going, and maybe meet up once a month at an agreed time. And it could be just at the pub, or it could be at somebody else's house, but much more of a free and easy basis. So those who can will go along, and those who really can't or are not interested won't bother. So that can be one thing that they can do where they don't feel quite so isolated.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really good idea, and sometimes life gets in the way. So sometimes setting up a closed Facebook group where people can pop in and keep up to date can be useful.
Yep, that's right. Or have a WhatsApp group maybe where they can keep in contact with each other as and when they want to. I mean, some groups on their level 4 have had smaller groups within the big group, like a study group, and they might find they want to continue that after the course is finished, and that can be a good way of keeping in touch. I think mostly tutors tend not to want to keep in touch with their groups. So really the students are kind of on their own in more ways than one once the course is finished, unless of course they're finishing off pieces of work, and then they are going to have some contact with their tutor. But in terms of the whole group and the tutor or tutors, that that doesn't really happen.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, really, isn't it? Because as a tutor, and I speak as a tutor myself, you're with someone for, maybe with someone for 4 years, and at the end of it, they disappear. I mean, I have to kind of say that I'm in touch with a number of my students on a professional level. It's not a personal level, they don't come around to my house for tea or anything like that. But on a professional level, they contact me, and sometimes they'll phone up and say, I'm thinking about this, Rory, what do you think? And I'm quite happy with that. I suspect other tutors may not be, and that will be for them. But just keeping in contact can be so useful and not as isolating.
Yes, absolutely. And if there are some people in the group who are still finishing off work, maybe finishing their client hours, perhaps finishing some portfolio work, or maybe having to do a resit, then it can be really, really useful for them to have contact with some of their peers, even though the class contact time is finished. And so again, finding someone else that they can share with in the group, if there's not an actual smaller group set up, can be a really good idea.
Yes, I agree. And I think the other thing is to consider that training groups are a unique event in people's lives. And when people move away from the training group, they may very well lose contact with people, or they may very well change and find the values that they had when they're in the training group aren't really aligned anymore. So sometimes you've got to, students have told me, and certainly from my experience, that you've got to be aware that nothing lasts forever.
Yes, yeah. And I think to prepare for that before they get to the end of the course, it really is worth thinking about, and not just thinking of the joy of completing the course, but actually there will be some sadness, and it is a loss not to see your group on a weekly basis like that again, ever. It is a loss, and it's worth thinking. It's a bit like a bereavement. How can I actually get through this? What other things can I put in place, whether that's support from the individuals in the group, but on a different basis, or putting other things in place like CPD, maybe. So there are other things to go to. It will be with a different group, but they will still get some support for the professional work that they do.
Yes, I think you've hit on a very important ethical point, because the current BACP ethical framework and other ethical frameworks are available, as we like to say, is that they say that no one should really work in isolation, that we should really make contacts, and there's lots of groups that actually physically meet. I'm quite big on physically meeting people. I think being in a virtual group's a good thing, but actually there's counsellors meets all over the country, and you can join a Facebook group and they come up. We meet there's one near me in Preston. They meet every 6 weeks. I think that's useful to face-to-face meet people, and conferences, of course. Going to conferences.
Yeah. And we wouldn't necessarily recommend that people who've just finished a level 4 go into independent practice anyway. So the chances are they're going to be continuing in their agency. So they've still got all the people that they know in their agency. And there might be further agency trainings that they can then click into now that they're actually a qualified counsellor.
Yes.
So there will be other things going on there.
Yes, and I think that's another kind of raging debate that happens. People say, where is qualified level? Maybe one for another podcast. But yes, as it stands, level 4 would be considered qualified. I know that people have an opinion whether that's qualified to work in an agency or qualified to work in private practice. But yes, you make a good point. Networking within an agency. Some people choose to stay on in their agency, don't they, for a number of years?
Yes, a large number do, yeah.
Yeah. So all this is really useful. The message I'm getting, Heather, is that we shouldn't work in isolation. We shouldn't work in a bunker or a silo.
Absolutely. And we should prepare for what we're going to do after the course is finished.
Yeah, so if there's anybody, who's in a group now, it may be worth having that conversation. And hopefully tutors had sparked that conversation up as well, because there's an acknowledgement that things come to an end.
Yes, yeah. And it's nice if the students can actually organise it themselves to do what they want to do, to keep some aspects of that group communication still going, even when the course has ended.
Yes. So lots to think about there. Tutors should be facilitating that, rather like a therapy session, marking down the time so people can become aware of the huge change that will take place when they're no longer part of a training group. And certainly that was my experience. I'm sure it was yours.
Yeah. And I think like you say, you can liken it to the client experience, where we'd be saying, well, now we've got 2 more sessions left. Now we've got 1 more session left. Next week is going to be the last one. What are you going to be doing on a Monday afternoon instead of seeing me? That kind of thing. And students can be beginning to think about that as well.
Yeah, so if anyone's listening and they're a student, maybe they're a tutor, take that to your training group and take those wise words to your training group and start that work now, because as they say, all good things do come to an end. So Heather, as always, a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
If I was a student, I'd have been glad of that when I finished my level 3, because I was a bit lost at the end of it, to be honest. So, yeah, I wish I'd have listened to that.
And I guess that's what we do here at Counselling Tutor and on our podcast, is try and bring you the information we wish that we had. And the next topic I think is absolutely superb. John Mellor-Clark was instrumental in the kind of early development of CORE. He was part of that team. CORE is an assessment tool, a measurement tool for checking the effectiveness of therapy. And it's a really interesting topic. We get a lot of communication about this on our Facebook group. We get emails about this. And there's kind of 2 camps on this. Some people saying, it kind of is a break in the therapy where you have to ask these questions and tick boxes. And is it really... does it match my modality? Maybe my modality is person-centered or something like that. But when you kind of look into this, and if you listen to John and Rory did the interview on this, you're going to hear how effective measurement can be. And if you kind of look at how practice works at the moment, we practice based on the latest research, and research is measurement.
Absolutely, and it's not often you meet, and I'm going to use the term. I know John would be maybe quite embarrassed about this, but a legend in research, because the research team that he was part of has really changed the way that we think about using measurement in counselling in a real positive light. And I have to say, I've changed my mind. I up to a couple of years ago, I was a real skeptic. Now I'm a bit of a convert, having had explained to me, and this is the key thing, having had explained to me how it works. And I think that's the key here. Once you understand how to introduce it and why you use it and build it into your therapeutic pathway, it becomes an invaluable aid to helping the clients. And as John Mellor-Clark outlined, so let's have a listen to him.
Let's get straight into Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome a very special guest, John Mellor-Clark, who was one of the architects of CORE assessment, an assessment tool that is used worldwide for therapists to assess and to take note of clients' presentations. So, John, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Rory.
So we talked earlier, just off before we recorded, about the history of CORE, and you spoke a little bit about your experience at Leeds. So what is the history of CORE assessment?
Okay, that's a really good question to start with. I guess that I've personally been involved in measurement for about 35 years or so now, and in the very, very early days of measurement, when we were looking for questionnaires to try to determine the outcomes of counselling and other psychological therapies, we were restricted to questionnaires that were largely owned by publishing houses and used in formal research. And as a consequence of being owned by the publishing houses, they cost money. And so in the 1980s, there was a conference held in the UK that became a book. The book was called Research Foundations in Psychological Therapies, or I think it was Research Foundations in Psychotherapy was the title. And essentially out of that conference came this call for a pan-theoretical, widely used free measure that people could photocopy and use, provided obviously that they didn't change it. And that was the call that the Mental Health Foundation put out in the mid-90s to academic institutions as a tender. And we at the University of Leeds applied for that tender, and we were successful, and that was the start of the core outcome measure.
Yes, and I'm sure there will. I mean, that is a really comprehensive overview, John. And I think a lot of people may be wondering why we use an assessment tool. I know that I've had people say from the person-centered kind of direction of therapy that it's not something that would have been done in person-centered therapy. I tend to take a slightly different view on that. But what is the purpose of using something like the core assessment?
Again, I think that's a very, very good question, Rory. I think that, the purpose of the first session in therapy, as I would understand it and have understood it for many, many years, as a consumer of psychological therapy, not as a provider. I need to make that distinction clear. I'm a researcher and a consumer of therapy. I'm not a provider of therapy. I think that the purpose really is to try to help establish that rapport and that alliance within the first session by collecting a set of standardized information that could be really, really helpful for guiding and informing the explorations in that first 50 minutes, 60 minutes of conversation. So asking a client to actually fill in a questionnaire and having the time to look at that questionnaire and to build some hypotheses, some theories as to what might be troubling this person and causing them to be distressed, and in turn, perhaps, understanding the level of distress. I think that's the principal reason for using a questionnaire at the assessment, at the beginning of therapy.
I think you've hit on a very interesting point there, so that the therapist can gain a understanding of what may be going on for the client, because it's not always vocalized in a therapy session. As a therapist myself, some people really struggle to vocalize what's going on, and they need a lead from the therapist to say, looking at your questionnaire, it looks like you're really struggling with anxious thoughts at the moment. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So what it does, it can give a very useful lead in to get right to the difficulty the client's had. The client's telling you what the difficulty is by using this form, and then they can outline, perhaps at their own pace, what's going on for them, rather than the therapist saying to them, well, what are you here for? It can alter the start and the commencement of therapy quite significantly, can't it?
Absolutely. And some of the things that we hear is, from therapists that have found it to be a very positive, engaging experience, both for them and for their clients, a common expression is, it warms clients up. It helps them to start thinking about their problems, about life in the last week, etc. And as you say, it helps a client to perhaps articulate some areas of their lives that might be difficult to talk about in that first 50 minutes. And that I think probably the strongest example of that are the 6 questions that CORE asks on risk, both risk to self in terms of self-harm, potential risk of suicide, but also risk to others as well. And I think many, many practitioners would say, yes, it's, those are the tough questions to ask in the first session when you're trying to get to know somebody. And actually having them in a questionnaire is useful because it means that the process of asking the questions and assessing that risk becomes standardized, and you don't have to worry about how you incorporate it into that 50-minute session, because to some extent it has been done in those 6 questions and therefore can be explored more if the client has responded positively, which most won't.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm getting is that you're gaining so much information at the commencement of therapy. And I guess in terms of risk, if the core form is used as part of the wider policy that you have in your practice regarding things like confidentiality, things like your harm to self and harm to other policy, it doves in really nicely to that, doesn't it? Because you lead on from the contracting to the assessment tool, and that they both kind of live really, really well in practice.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, all services will have a policy and a process for risk assessment and for risk management following assessment. And by having a set of standardized questions that they ask of every single client, that is ultimately what informs the process. And so if you were in the sad position of having a client sadly take their lives or harm themselves in some way, and they hadn't disclosed that on the form, then you have a clear conscience that you have asked those questions and that you have tried to ensure through appropriate and ethical practice that you have taken every step that you can to explore the client's potential for risk or self-harm.
Yeah, so it forms the basis of defensible decision-making, and it forms the basis of risk management, any risk management procedures.
But I would also say that, before we purely think about it in terms of measuring things like the severity of somebody's risk or of self-harm, and again, I'll say that, in our profiles, we probably see no more than 10% at most showing up on any risk profile on the core measure, etc. We have to think about the positive things that clients may say about their lives, things that are going well. So within the core, there are positively framed questions like, I felt okay about myself. I felt optimistic about my future. And having positively framed items within a questionnaire helps you to explore a client's strengths and the positivity of their context and things that you can focus on rather than just purely focusing on some of the problems that they're presenting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, and I'm guessing within that, you can look at the positive aspects. I guess when therapy comes to an end and the core form's filled in, you can look at the distance travelled, maybe from when people started to when people ended.
That's the whole idea. As an outcome measure, as well as being an assessment tool, the idea in the early days was that you gave it at the beginning of therapy and then you gave it again at the end of therapy. The challenge of just doing it at the beginning and at the end of therapy, which is now relatively well documented and well understood in guidelines for measurement, is that for a range of reasons, not everybody gets to the end of therapy. And as a consequence, if you're only measuring at the beginning, at the end, then it's not unusual to have 40, 50% of your clients actually not completing a measure at the end. And as a consequence of that very pragmatic and realistic view, phenomena, if you like, in therapy, that's why we've begun now as a nation to use measures more frequently in therapy. For 2 advantages. One is if a client drops out of therapy or chooses that they've had enough, then you have a measure of the last session that they attended. And secondly, it allows you to manage outcomes. So by asking a client to complete a much shorter questionnaire, perhaps at each session, it allows you to quantify the direction of change and travel and potentially step people up, to services that may be a better help to the client, step people down, or what's begun to happen in some services is actually to step people across, where you recognize that perhaps there are people within the organization that have skills, that have resources, that have experience of working with this sort of presentation that may actually be better suited for the client, and therefore discuss with the client, could we, suggest that you work with one of my colleagues? And that's not unusual these days.
Yeah, so it's gone from a beginning and an end tool to a tool that's used throughout the process of therapy and is very helpful in referring. So if you need to refer somebody to a different service or someone with a different skill set, you can use the tool to do that and evidence your reasoning behind that.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I'm purely saying that they are not necessarily on the basis of science, Rory, or published papers, or even recommendations. I'm saying it as something that I personally have observed working with services at the coalface of how they use their data. The whole purpose for me of using a measure, using a questionnaire as a consumer, as a researcher, is to transform the data, to use the data. And for us, the first stage of using it is to turn it into learning. What does this tell me about the client or my clients or the clients that we see? The second stage is to transform that learning into knowledge. How can we use our learning to actually understand how we could better deliver our service? And then ultimately, the goal of using measurement and its data is to use it for change. How can we become a better service? What are these data telling us that we can use to change the way, to improve the way that we meet our clients' needs? And what I'm giving you as an example of in the stepping across are creative examples of some services that have grown their confidence in measurement and data to such an extent that they are willing to change practitioner on the basis of the value that they ascribe to the questionnaires that clients are filling in. But we have to remember, questionnaires are the client's voice. Questionnaires are not about converting people to numbers. They are about listening to the client and hearing the client in an efficient way.
Well, I think as we come to the end of this interview, John, echoing in my mind is Roger's wise words, the facts are always friendly. And it feels to me that the core assessment produces really friendly facts that allow therapists to be able to make informed decisions. And as you say, and I'm really struck with that, and I think I'd like people to kind of leave with that thought, it gives the client a voice. We are in service, as therapists, we are in service of the client, and a tool that gives the client a voice, I don't think can be a bad thing. So, John Mellor-Clark, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, John Mellor-Clark. Thank you, Rory, for that interview. So much learning there, and I think you led into this, Rory, by using the word legend and kind of putting inverted commas and saying John might be embarrassed, but it is as it is. Really, really interesting. And of course, we have a complete lecture from John Mellor-Clark on core, on the assessment tool, on how to use that. And that is available for our qualified practitioners from our CPD library, where we kind of have on-demand CPD training, formal lectures mapped to learning outcomes that you can watch from a device. You kind of just log in and it's all there. It's kind of like your favorite television streaming service. Think of Netflix or whatever you prefer. Others are available, but all the content is counselling related. And if you're interested in our CPD provision, you can get more information at counsellingtutor.com.
Yes, well, I think it's been a really enriching topics today, Ken. We started off by preparing for your next level interview, so moving into new beginnings. We talked with Kelly Budd at CPCAB about effectively managing endings and thinking about your support system. And then we went with John Mellor-Clark, who spoke eloquently about the new ideas in counselling and psychotherapy. And as Rogers famously said, the facts are always friendly, and there's plenty of facts from John Mellor-Clark there. So, as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and look after each other.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.